Hello YouTube, greetings from the Lazy Eyebrow to part 4 in the tutorial series. We've covered stable camera and stable lighting. We've covered smooth motion, easing in and easing out. We've covered walking. Now with those fundamentals in place, we can actually get to flying and running. Being that stop motion is a series of frames taken over many things, getting those still pictures would mean that anything flying is going to have to be suspended somehow. This is not an easy thing to do. However, with a little bit of know-how, you can make anything look like it's flying convincingly and interacting with anything you may have on your animations. So there's 3 methods we're going to look at today, and they'll have various different drawbacks and pros and cons to them, as well as different levels of intensity of how much work you want to do. So let's go over them.
So method 1, the green screen. Technically this doesn't need to be green. If your software can do it, it can actually be any color. Bright green just happens to be used as the color seen least in nature, and therefore an easy color to key out. But that being said, you can really pick any color so long as you have the software to erase the background. For those that have been following along at Stop Motion Studio, the option remains for keying out blue or green, though picking the shade of each color doesn't seem to be an option, so there's that, I guess. This is the method I personally use the least. Technology has made it easier than ever to get the rudimentary effect pulled off, but in general, I've never liked the way it looks for several reasons. For one, what if you have a character that has both green and blue elements? Then a good portion of your figure is going to trigger the software filter. And even that aside, figures with chrome are really going to become your screen. And lastly, unlike people, which generally have a matte sheen to them, robots have shiny, smooth plastic panels that no matter what angle you put them, though especially at shallow ones, something is going to reflect your screened color. All those negatives aside, if you still insist on using a color screen and having the process shoddily automated, here's how to do it with the best results. First, you'll need the screen to first of all be curved to eliminate any creases, and second, evenly lit so that your software is getting a nice, even color to work with. Second, move your figure as far away as you possibly can. Animate it on a piece of glass if possible. Do whatever you can so that your screen and your subject are far away from each other. This has a twofold purpose. For one, your camera focus will be on the subject, and the further away from the screen you are, the blurrier it will be, smoothing out any imperfections in your screen itself, and as far as the camera is concerned, making it an even smoother screen to key out. The second benefit of this is it will cut down on any potential reflections the color will reflect onto your figure. From there, you can animate and then transpose your keyed layer onto your shot, and there we go, we're flying. Again, this is the method I recommend the least. It takes the least amount of work, and the end result is usually indicative of that. Method 2, rotoscoping. Going to the opposite end of the spectrum, this is the method that takes the most amount of work. Much like the green screen method, you'll be taking your footage and then keying out parts you don't want. However, you'll be doing it manually in a program like Photoshop or GIMP. First off, for this method, you'll want to shoot your footage with objects that will be similar color as to what you'll be transposing it onto. Otherwise, it's not going to look natural. So think ahead as to what you want your final shot to look like and plan accordingly. For example, in the Warpath bumper, we see a green and blue background that Warpath runs around and transforms on. Completely blanking on this concept, I decided to shoot the entire thing in white, rotoscoped all the background out, and I was left with this garish looking Warpath running around on a muted color palette that I really had to color correct, and even then, it didn't look fantastic. This very reasoning is also why I don't particularly enjoy the green screen method. In order for it to look halfway decent, you need to color correct each frame to get rid of any green hues or it's really going to show, and in my personal opinion, without going the extra mile to clean it up, it just looks ugly, as seen in the bumper recreation for Masterpiece Starscream. I saw the green, did my best to color correct, but in the end, Starscream ended up with this sickly hue. It was the first and last time I used green screen for this sub-project of mine. So as for a good example, here's the thrust bumper. It takes place on a burnt orange background, so I filmed thrust flying around, but I also filled the shot with orange objects before I keyed everything out to give thrust the right color balance. So I have the shots. From there I import them into GIMP, and using my lasso tool, I will manually go and cut out the background out from each frame, and then export each file to a PNG so that I will have an image with a transparent background to work with. Then I take the finished image, drop it into my background, and there we have it. Thrust, but looking like he actually fits into the shot, with the colors looking like they all naturally blend together like this is how the shot was taken in the first place. So the positive aspect of this method is I personally feel it looks the best when your background can't be shot practically. The drawback being, however, is that this method takes a huge chunk out of your schedule to get everything done. For For reference, the G1 intro took me 6 months off and on of rotoscoping out 18 characters across 300 or so frames. If you're going to be doing this regularly, I recommend picking up a drawing tablet because once I got the hang of using it, it sped up my production time by cutting the background out by close to half the time. Method 3. Rigging. This is probably the best method. Anything that can be done practically will save loads of time in your post-filming end of things. This method employs the use of some sort of framing that is best as possible out of frame, and what can't be helped is inconspicuous that suspends the figure in midair. This can be beading wire, which we use sticky tack as our connection point, fishing line suspended from overhead, or in my case, a set of helping hands used for soldering. Mind you, if you go this route, I recommend flattening the teeth so you're not gouging your figures. The method then is to connect whatever it is you're using to the back of the figure so that none of your rig is obstructing your subject. Next, you take a picture of your background. This is called your clean plate and will come in handy later. Then you film your subject doing its mid-air thing, in this case it's a crayon doing a flip. Always make sure the rigging is behind your character, it will save you a ton of time in post. After that, we'll export all our footage to our computer where we'll import our plate, then our image on top, and then it's literally a matter of taking our eraser tool and erasing the rig. Repeat for all frames. Larger figures with the helping hands, it's the same story. Clean plate, rig behind your figure, erase rig, finished product. The nice thing about this setup is that you have complete control over where your figure ends up, and you can even have other figures interact simultaneously with your mid-air figure. And the fact that the figure is taken on the same shot as the background means that something as simple as shadows are also present, making the shot even more convincing. For those wondering what setup I personally use, I've been using a wide range over the years. For a while, I was using fishing line. I don't personally recommend it though, as it tends to swing around and takes a considerable amount of effort to get to remain still enough for a picture without looking blurry. So I built my own custom rig after a few years of using different setups. I started with building 2 aluminum rails that stay suspended above my light source so they're not adding any unnecessary shadows. Next, I designed a carriage built out of 3D printed parts and skateboard bearings that run along these rails, with an additional carriage that runs the length of the 2 cross rails. This carriage contains a spring-loaded paddle that clamps onto a threaded rod. This setup allows me to have complete control over my X, Y, and Z axis. From there, I took one of the helping hand ball joints and welded it to the end of the rod, then printed a series of different 5mm attachments to swap out with the ball joints that are also clampable. This part of the rig allows me to plug into any of the 5mm ports found everywhere on figures these days, while also giving me complete control over the yaw, roll, and pitch of the figure, which is allowed for flexibility in shots like Cyclonus, jazz breakdancing versus battle trap non-rig dance, Gigawatt coming in for a landing, or this initial test footage of the rig that was done for a friend's 15th anniversary compilation video. Hey, that actually reminds me, I said we'd start running. Well, that's what's great about rigs. The only difference between a walk and a run is an extra frame where the figure is airborne before the next step is taken. Also, the arms swing a little harder, but you get the general idea. Again, you can absolutely look at someone running and mimic the motions, but in general, there is a little bit of airborne taken, which is why the need for a rig.
So that was the tutorial for getting your figures running or flying. It's definitely not an easy thing to do, especially when compared to just dropping something like a car on the floor and letting gravity do the work balancing. Each method has its own drawbacks, its own positives, and you have to choose which method works best for your application. Even companies in the industrial sense will use a multitude of these methods in combination with each other to get the intended result of what they're trying to film. Regardless, I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. If you have, stay tuned where we go into the next one where we talk about the basics of transforming and how to get your figures look like they go from one to the other without a lot of that complicated mess in the middle. This has been Lazy Eyebrow.